the course of our last few lessons, we have been discussing the impact that the print culture had on India during colonial rule. We learned that printing presses made their way and established themselves in the Indian subcontinent during the colonial rule. We also learned about how the spread of this print culture facilitated the growth and spread of many reformist ideas, of many new ways of thinking. And at this point of time, the publishers and the booksellers were trying to reach out to all the sections of the society. To this end, small, cheap books were sold in the markets in 19th century Madras towns. Now these cheap books were intended to reach the people who belonged to the poor sections of the society. So they were the ones who got hold of these cheap books from the markets in 19th century Madras towns. Now the Britishers had come to the Indian subcontinent with the aim of establishing their power and authority over the lands. And at the same time, they had also invested themselves in the process of educating the natives. But how can natives be educated without any access to books and knowledge? Well, for this reason, the colonial government established many public libraries, and these public libraries were mostly set up in big cities and towns. Some were set up even in the semi-rural areas as well. And these public libraries were intended to increase masses' access to books, because these public libraries were open to all. Anyone at any point of time could enter these public libraries and read the many books that these libraries housed. And when we talk about the setting up of public libraries in the Indian subcontinent during the colonial rule, we should definitely mention the Connemara Public Library that was set up in Madras in the year 1896, and the National Library was set up in Calcutta in the year 1836. Now at this time, many rich liberal patrons were also setting up their own libraries in order to establish their authority and gain prominence among the masses. Now these different kinds of books that were housed in the public libraries helped the masses reflect on their position in the society. Owing to the access to printed materials, the masses were now able to talk about the caste discriminations that were prevalent in the Indian societies. Now caste discriminations have been prevalent in the subcontinent since many ages. But the masses have never had a medium or a platform to voice their opinion against their suppressed and oppressed status that was instituted by the caste hierarchy in the Indian society. But now the growing access to printed materials helped people understand their suppressed position in the society, and at the same time the masses were also able to write and record their experiences and their anger against the prevalent caste discriminations in the society. Now when we talk about the caste discriminations in the Indian society and the addressal of the same, we should definitely mention the social activist and anti-caste reformer Jyotiba Phule. Now Jyotiba Phule was from the present day Indian state of Maharashtra, and he was an anti-caste reformer, which means that he had devoted himself to bringing about changes in the ancient and oppressive caste system. He was against this discriminatory practice of the caste system. He wanted equality among the members of the various castes in the society. Now in his book Gulamgiri, Jyotiba Phule wrote about the injustices and oppression which were rooted in the caste system. Now the very title of the book Gulamgiri means slavery. People of the lower castes were reduced to the positions of slave or even worse. They were not given any recognition or any space to live happily in the society. The members of the upper castes used to oppress them, which is why their life was reduced to a state of slavery, as was recorded by Jyotiba Phule in this book called Gulamgiri. Now, in a discussion on the prevalence of caste discriminations in the society and any bitter discourse and dialogue against the same would bring us to the great political thinker, social activist and reformer B.R. Ambedkar. Now, B.R. Ambedkar hailed from the present day Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, and E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar, who was popularly known as Periyar, hailed from Madras. Now, these learned men were propagating very powerful discourses on caste discriminations in the Indian society. So, they were having debates and dialogues and discussions against the prevalence of caste discriminations in the society. They were envisioning change in the society. They wanted to reform the society so as to abandon and abolish the oppressive caste system. Now, the members of the lower castes were the ones who never had access to institutional education. They did not even have the money to survive properly. They were divested of all kinds of resources and even the rights to live healthy and happy lives. They were oppressed in the truest sense of the term. Now, they never read books in which they found themselves reflected. Books have always been written from the perspective of the upper caste members. So, the lower caste members have been historically excluded, so to speak. But now, with the proliferation and dissemination of anti-caste ideas, members of the lower castes now found themselves reflected in the writings of people like Periyar or even Ambedkar. Now, this also helped these lower caste members gather their ideas, because they have been seething with anger for many centuries, but they did not have anything to do with that anger. They did not have the option to properly express their anger. But now, with these writings and anti-caste ideas spreading among the masses, the lower caste members were able to organize caste movements at local scales. But these caste movements were not very organized in nature. These still did not get any national recognition, but these were happening at a local scale nevertheless. And through these caste movements, they were now able to redress their position in the society. They were now able to question and combat the oppressive caste system that has been oppressing them and suppressing their position in the society for many centuries. Now, in this regard, we should definitely take into account B.R. Ambedkar's book, Annihilation of Caste. Now, Annihilation of Caste was a speech that B.R. Ambedkar had prepared but never delivered, and it later took the shape of a book called Annihilation of Caste. Now, Annihilation of Caste is a very powerful and strong discourse against the caste system. And even today, in academic places, B.R. Ambedkar and his discussions in Annihilation of Caste gain great importance. These are still very relevant in academic discourses. Now, before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. Who wrote the famous book Annihilation of Caste that challenged the oppressive caste system in India? Was it written by Ram Mohan Roy, or B.R. Ambedkar, or Dadabhai Nauroji, or Jawaharlal Nehru? Well, the correct answer is B.R. Ambedkar. B.R. Ambedkar's very strong and powerful discourse against the caste system that took the shape of this book, Annihilation of Caste, plays a very important role in questioning and challenging the oppressive caste system, which is why it continues to be relevant in today's academic discourses as well. But not all lower caste members were well read enough to write their own books, because more often than not they used to belong to the lowest and poorest sections of the society. They used to be peasants, workers. They did not have the time or the knowledge to write their books, to vocalize their opinions. But a mill worker by the name of Kashi Baba wrote a new book called Chote aur Bade Ka Sawal in the year 1938. Now, what does this book talk about? This book establishes links between caste and class-based exploitation of mill workers. Now let me explain to you this intermingling of caste and class-based exploitation that used to happen in the Indian subcontinent. Firstly, we learned about how the caste system was the locus of oppression, because the caste system hierarchized the society into the four castes, in which the upper caste members oppressed the lower caste members. The lower caste members were exploited. They did not have knowledge and education, which is why they had to work as peasants, workers, and so from this we can understand that they also belonged to the lowest economic class, because simultaneously with belonging to the lowest caste, these people had to do menial work, which meant that they were also forced to remain within the lowest economic class. Now, the lowest economic class was in turn exploited by the upper economic classes, which were again occupied by the upper caste members. So, from this we can understand that caste as well as class together exploited members who were poor and from the lower castes. Now, these mill workers belonged to the lower caste, and at the same time they also belonged to the lower class as well. Now, class is an economic category, and by the amount of resources that a person holds, their class is determined. So, these mill workers are poor and they have to work under the mill owners. Now, the mill owners were mostly members of the upper castes who used to have the resources in order to buy and own mills. And these mill owners and rich landowners used to exploit these mill workers. So, these mill workers were reduced to a state of almost nothing, which is why this book that was written by Kashi Baba was known as Chote aur Bade Ka Sawal. Now, the word chote in English means small and bade means huge or large. Now, by chote, Kashi Baba meant the mill workers. They were poor, they belonged to the lower caste and class, and they were exploited by the rich and affluent mill owners who are referred to as big or bade in this book. So, we can understand how both caste and class together mingled to work as the locus of oppression against these mill workers in colonial India. Likewise, another person who took the name of Sudarshan Chakra also wrote a series of poems which came to be known as Sachi Kavitae. These were written between 1935 and 1955. Now, the words Sachi and Kavitae mean real poems. So, these real poems or true poems were authentic account of the exploitation that the mill workers had to face. So, these people at this point of time were now being able to vocalize their opinions, and they were now able to write their own experiences. They were now able to record the hardships and the struggles that they had to face simply because they belonged to the lower castes and classes. Now, the lower class members were now very keen on educating themselves, which is why By the 1930s, Bangalore cotton mill workers had begun setting up libraries for themselves, and they had followed the lead of some Bombay workers. So they were now setting up libraries in order to educate themselves. But a very pertinent question that arises in this regard is that how did these poor mill workers get the money to set up a library? Well, they were assisted by the social reformers. So the social reformers were the ones who used to sponsor the setting up of these libraries. Now, why do you think were the social reformers sponsoring the setting up of libraries? Well, firstly, they wanted to prevent these lower class mill workers and other factory workers from consuming too much alcohol. Instead, if new libraries were set up for them, they would now go to these libraries and read books in their spare hours. And in this way, they would now be in the process of educating themselves. And at the same time, the social reformers also wanted to infuse the minds of these people with nationalistic ideas. So with the spread of nationalistic ideas among these people, the social reformers believed that together they would all be empowered to fight against British colonial rule in the Indian subcontinent. Now, surprisingly enough, when the East India Company had established itself as a trading company in the Indian subcontinent, it did not censor what was being printed. But the East India Company was also against those Englishmen in India who criticized the company's rules and policies. Now, there were many Englishmen in the Indian subcontinent who criticized the company's policies and talked about how the company was misgoverning the people of the Indian subcontinent. In one of our lessons, we talked about James Augustus Hickey and how he criticized company officials and the company's policies. Well, many such men were there in the Indian subcontinent during the rule of the company, but prior to 1798, the colonial state did not censor print in Indian subcontinent. But after that, by the 1820s, the Calcutta Supreme Court now imposed certain restrictions on print, because the East India Company was no longer willing to accept any kind of criticism. It also knew that if these kinds of critical commentaries are printed and published against the company and its rule in the subcontinent, then its own image and popularity among the Indian masses would be severely tarnished. And it is for this reason that restrictions or censorship on print by the 1820s was established or imposed by the Calcutta Supreme Court. Now, we have learnt that during the 19th century, different kinds of newspapers and journals and tracts were being published in the Indian subcontinent. Many were being published in the Indian vernacular languages as well. And all these printers and publishers were now pressing the colonial state to revise the press laws, because they were at the same time not willing to accept the colonial state's impositions and restrictions on print, which is why the then Governor General William Bentinck revised the press laws in 1835. And when this liberal Governor General of British India had revised the press laws, certain restrictions were removed and certain relaxations were now added to the press laws. And finally, when the liberal colonial official Thomas Babington Macaulay came to India, he formulated many new press laws, and these press laws were supposed to restore the former press freedoms. So around this time, when Babington Macaulay had restored the erstwhile press freedoms, the Indian printing and press houses were again able to print whatever they wanted. But this press freedom isn't something that the Indian press houses enjoyed for long. This is because following the Great Revolt of 1857, the colonial government now became increasingly hostile as well as suspicious of Indian press, which is why it now passed the Vernacular Press Act in 1878. Now, when the Great Revolt of 1857 broke out, the colonial government realized the power that these Indian press houses have had in circulating their ideas among the masses. They realized that it was because of the press freedoms that these press houses were able to publish whatever they wanted, and in this way these newspapers, journals and tracts spread nationalistic ideas among the masses. So, to this end, the colonial government now imposed the Vernacular Press Act in 1878. Now, the Vernacular Press Act was modelled on Irish press laws, and it provided the government extensive rights to censor reports and editorials in the vernacular presses. So, from this we can understand how the Britishers were now very keen to control what was being printed and circulated among the masses around this point of time. They no longer allowed the vernacular press to print whatever they wanted. Now, these vernacular press houses were the ones who criticized the government's policies and its officials. And at the same time, these vernacular press houses also played a very crucial role in spreading and disseminating nationalistic ideas among the masses. And it is for this reason that censorship was imposed on print in the Indian subcontinent. But do you think the very repressive and oppressive Vernacular Press Act was able to hold back the Indian nationalists from printing their own newspapers and journals? No, it was not able to do so, because the more the colonial government wanted to impose restrictions on print, many new revolutionary newspapers were now coming to the fore, and these nationalistic newspapers continued to highlight colonial misrule in the subcontinent. And while these nationalistic newspapers highlighted that the colonial government was misgoverning the people, it was oppressive in nature, it was very crucially spreading nationalistic ideas among the masses, because the masses were now being gathered and united on the grounds of being oppressed by the colonial government. So earlier on, the masses were rebelling against the colonial government in local pockets, and now in different parts of the Indian subcontinent, people realized that these nationalistic ideas and sentiments could be instrumental in helping them gain freedom and independence from the oppressive British colonial rule. But on the other hand, the colonial government was also trying its best to thwart the spread of these nationalistic newspapers, because they knew that if these nationalistic sentiments were filling up the minds of Indian masses, the colonial rule and authority would be overthrown, which is why clashes and conflicts broke out between the Indian nationalists and the colonial officials at different places, and these clashes often took violent turn, and the colonial officials severely punished and imprisoned all these revolutionaries. Now, in the year 1907, the Indian national movement activist Bal Gangadhar Tilak wrote in his newspaper Kesari about the Punjab revolutionaries. Now, these Punjab revolutionaries were deported by the colonial officials, and he wrote with great sympathy about these Punjab revolutionaries in his newspaper called Kesari. And to this end, immediately he was imprisoned in 1908, because the Britishers were very reluctant to address and acknowledge any kind of opposition and criticism. They were ruling with iron hands, so to speak. And so the imprisonment of Bal Gangadhar Tilak happened in 1908. Now, the imprisonment of Bal Gangadhar Tilak was immediately followed by many demonstrations and clashes in several parts of the subcontinent. Now, these clashes, conflicts, violent uprisings and protests kept on happening through the colonial period till the Indian masses were successful in gaining their independence from the Britishers in the year 1947. So this brings us to an end of our discussion on print culture and the modern world. In this lesson, to be specific, we talked about how the print culture had birthed in the minds of Indian citizens the streak of questioning. The masses were questioning their oppressed status, be that in the caste hierarchy or even in the class discriminations. We learned about how Perrier as well as B.R. Ambedkar talked about caste discriminations that have been prevalent in the Indian society since many ages. And at the same time, we also learned how the mill workers at this point of time were also vocalizing their opinion about how miserable their lives were. Subsequently, we talked about how the Britishers wanted to stop nationalistic newspapers from spreading nationalistic ideas and sentiments among the masses. Now, this lesson has been successful in helping us understand the importance that the print culture has had in the Indian subcontinent during the colonial rule. Now, in this series of lessons, we have traced the trajectory of print technology in not just India but throughout the world. We learned about how hand printing techniques or wood block printing technique, to be very specific, originated in China. We also learned about how this woodblock printing technique made its way to Japan. And subsequently, we discussed at great length how this hand printing technique entered Europe, got new shape and eventually paved the way for the establishment of the Gutenberg printing press. Now, the Gutenberg printing press played a major role in the history of humankind because it brought about the print revolution. It is with the print revolution that different sections of the society were now being able to enlighten themselves, and they were being able to free themselves from the clutches of ignorance, from the shadows of knowing nothing. And then we also talked about how the print culture also proliferated and played a very crucial role in the Indian subcontinent during the colonial rule. Now, this print culture still continues to dominate our lives. In every possible sphere and walk of our lives, we are surrounded by printed materials. Well, if these printed materials had not been there, we would have never been able to share our ideas, to share our thought processes, to vocalize our opinions, our experiences, and what we feel about different things. So, this lesson has been very instrumental in helping us understand how the print culture is very important in the modern world, and we have also traced how it has evolved to reach where it is today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.